Now being 10 o'clock, we'll call the Policy and Governance meeting to order. All three districts are represented. Notice the meeting was properly posted September 8th. Next item would be approval of minutes for August 16th.
Second.
Have a motion second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Let me just go down to some of the item 5, discussion possible action regarding update on the burial and cremation program policy. Christy. Hello.
This is a policy update. This is the same document that you were looking at the last meeting. However, in the meantime, I had sent out another document that addressed the comments and questions and concerns that you had raised in hopes that if these changes do what you want it to do, then we would just incorporate those changes into the document that we would submit to the BOCC for approval.
So the changes that you're requesting are the same that were reflected in the email that you sent that had
Yes.
the change language?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
And have you ran that across with the DA to make sure that the language is sufficient according to statute?
We submitted all of the documents prior to putting it on this agenda. We submitted it all to the DA, but they said that they don't address policy.
Well, my question is, does any of that policy violate statute? Which would be a legal question.
I'm happy to send it back through them with a more directed question rather than just reviewing the policy for form and legality.
Yeah, let's do that and then bring it back here next month.
Okay.
Anything else on this item?
Not for me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Item 6, discussion possible action regarding selection of August and September employees of the month. Thank you.
Good morning. We have an option A, B, and C for August. We have an option A for September.
I'd be open to 2 candidates for August and the third candidate be rolled over to September. So we have 2 candidates for September.
Okay, do you have any choice on who you want to do that?
I think it's however the motion's rolled out.
I'll make a motion for option B and C for August and option, well, let's just do that and then roll over option A to September.
Okay.
All right, that being a motion, do we have a second? Second that item.
I was just still reviewing this.
Questions, further questions? Motion before us. All those in favor say aye. The ayes have it. Thanks, Karen. I think I was supposed to bring a draft. This is item 7, action regarding a draft to the resolution of establishing a Citizen Bond Oversight Advisory Board. This committee to review. If you guys have had not opportunity to review it, or if you have any questions or want to add to it or remove items, we've still got time to work through this a little bit.
A couple thoughts and or questions after reading through the document. Number one on the first page, it's talking about BOCC creating this November blank of 2022. I would assume that's just a kind of a suggestion, whereas if we do have a recommendation, we're not necessarily saying we have to wait until November for BOCC to create this. They could create it in October.
Yeah, draft document. I just put a date there. I didn't want to put yesterday and then everybody panicked.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to make sure that we were all clear on that. On the membership, I did notice that we've got a provision in here that they have to either live in Oklahoma County or be employed in Oklahoma County. I think for something of this magnitude and the voters, the residents of the county who supported this, I think we might want to consider it being a resident of Oklahoma County and not just an individual that is in a situation like me that works in Oklahoma County but doesn't actually live here and did not have the opportunity to even vote on it. So
So you're taking your name out of consideration for this board?
well, I think we would all be out of consideration, but somebody in a similar situation.
Understandable. That was just a consideration because it's been done on other, well, for instance, the trust has done that. So I understand that. We can remove that line.
My other question, and I understand why it's here, but in paragraph 5, well, number 5, sub 3, following Robert's Rules of Order, I know there needs to be some type of mechanism there to know how you're operating your business. I just don't know that anybody around here is a scholar enough in Robert's Rules of Order to know exactly what all is involved in that and whether they would be or not be following that to the letter. Does that make sense? Because we don't even follow Robert's rules at our meetings. I mean, we're loosely based, but it's not exactly. So I just don't know that the county clerk's office would be proficient enough in those rules to know exactly what processes and procedures needed to occur to stay within those guidelines. Just a thought.
Do you know how many people actually belong to the Roberts Rules of Order Society in the county clerk's office?
How many?
2 that I'm aware of.
Oh, good.
So I would say that they're more than adept to being able to do it. It's just whether or not they will.
Well, okay, that's a good point, but it's also
tested and they're certified. So
okay. We've had questions about Robert's Rules of Order in the past on meetings, and nobody has seemed to have an answer. That's where I'm basing my conclusion on. So I understand why we would want something in here so that there's a designation of, you got a motion and a second and all of that. I get that. It's just I want to make sure that we're not creating hiccups.
they have these wonderful yellow books that I'm more than willing to buy. They're Robert's Rules of Orders for dummies that even I can understand. So
That's nice of you.
Or just my own copy. We can do that.
All right. So uh,
Well, that's one of the, that's one of the items that has come under consideration in the past.
And I think doing that properly would be kind of nice.
all right, so maybe removing one line and considering Miles's generous gift of copies of some rules.
Yeah, I'm fine with the rules as long as they're known and everybody is able to follow them. And just for clarity, on the actual appointment, this would be one appointment from each individual commissioner, and then the commissioners would decide as a whole on the other four. Is that
That's the way it's written at this point, yes.
The one of the questions I had about this, Michael, is if we don't if I missed, if you help me out, do we say anything about places of its meetings with approval of the county clerk, clerk of the OAB? Do we want to? I mean, is this going to be a traveling show, or should we just say, or does that matter?
As,
Curious.
as far as where they have their meetings,
But I guess leaving it that way allows us to move to different rooms inside the building too, right? So,
correct?
okay,
Yeah, I'll look at, see.
that's fine.
Yeah, I think with the technology that would need to be deployed in these, if they operate the meetings the way we do all of our others where they're streamed, that they would be somewhere in this building, probably in here or across the hall. But yeah, I do appreciate the language that's in there that they will determine based upon approval from the clerk's office, because you have lots of meetings that you guys are running now, and we do get into situations to where there's cross scheduling and whatnot, especially as it relates to special meetings. So, yeah.
All right, I'll clean that up for next meeting and we'll maybe have the agenda item not in all caps, so it doesn't look like I'm yelling at you. All right, so anything else on item 7?
I'm comfortable if we want to move forward with it and make the edits and send it to BOCC based on what we've discussed.
As a completed document,
Yeah, I mean, we're
covers
removing
all the bases.
Yeah, we're removing the language related to working in the county, and if we have people in the clerk's office that understands Robert's rules, and Miles said there's a book, Robert's Rules for Cody's out there, then I think we can all be fine with that. So, yeah.
Entertain a motion.
Go ahead.
Motion to make the recommendation to BOCC to approve the resolution establishing the Citizens Oversight Board with the amendments as discussed in this meeting.
Second.
Motion is second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right. Let's go back up to the top. Item 2, we do have a citizen that would like to speak on item 2. I'll go ahead and have Mr. Pettis come up and welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My request is the same as it was at the last meeting, that funds be set aside for housing, mental health, healthcare, small business, and the other category that I mentioned at the last meeting. I may be kind of premature, but I don't see or have heard any movement on that. And maybe the consultant will address that this morning. So I'll just listen to see what the status of it is in moving forward. Thank you.
And thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pettis.
And usually we get a status report set on deck. That is item 3, so forgive us for jumping back and forth.
We like to
It's throwing me off.
Right. We like to keep it a little, off kilter to keep you on your toes.
All right. Well, good morning. So we'll give a quick status update, and then we can get into the proposals that are still in flux. If we let's see if I can do this here. Yeah, there we go. All right. So since the last time we were here and spoke with you, we've seen 11 new proposals come in, and we'll be looking at those today. Otherwise, we've been very busy doing other things. So trying to get the community engagement plan that we set out previously up and off the ground. So while we're here this week, we're visiting some different community venues that you shared with us. So thank you for that. And then also, we've got a line out to IT about setting up the survey and seeing what tools or preferences they might have in our approach to doing that. And then I'm going to jump to number 7 there just because it's related. We are engaging with the OKC Alliance for Economic Development and sharing ideas there, especially as it pertains to community involvement. We're actually meeting with them tomorrow. So I'm hoping for a good relationship with them and collaboration.
If I could real quick before
Sure.
we get too far, on the community engagement venues, I know it may be in this presentation, but you had mentioned the community center and the Reed Center for District 1. Talking to Midwest City, and I think you guys may have this information, but they're willing to help host. They've got IT in that community center.
Oh, yeah.
So I think that's probably going to be the route there. And then I believe we sent you information on another entity.
Do you recall? Yeah, Sheraton.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
All right. Anything else there?
No.
Okay. All right. Otherwise, we're looking at some things around the specific proposals. So a couple items that you'll see today that we're just calling kind of added costs here. So these are proposals that have already been authorized, and we need to revisit the cost estimates for those and work with you all to come up with a kind of a process for handling that kind of situation, which we see might come up more, especially with a lot of the capital projects that we're looking at. So something to be cognizant of, and that Danny will help us talk through a little later. Like overruns and inflation costs, is that what we're talking about? Yeah, or if the bid that was originally submitted has expired and needs to be resubmitted, that sort of thing. Okay, and then number 5 is a big one, obviously. So we're working with the Sheriff's Office and others around the question of payroll and benefits and how we might be able to allocate the reimbursement of payroll and benefits to certain types of staff and figuring out who those staff are, how much we can allocate toward that, et cetera. So still doing the homework on that and working with these departments who are requesting it to come up with those narratives and the supporting documentation and all that. So meeting with Andrea from Sheriff's Office later today, actually. Similarly, premium pay is another big item that is very much in flux, trying to pin down the data on how we can come up with that number and what it should look like. And we developed a method to make sure that we approach this in a standardized way across all departments, across individuals, and we meet the goals of this particular provision. And then also coming up with a way to model different scenarios so that we can, strike a balance between something that's impactful for these employees, but won't also, drain the fund for other things.
Number 8 here, just a quick note. We sent out status updates to all the departments, just a rundown of here's all your projects, here's where our understanding of where they're at. And if they see anything differently, they can come back to us. If there were open questions, we've acknowledged those and asked for if they had any updates there, et cetera. It's something we want to get in the habit of doing more regularly to help kind of grease the wheels, keep things moving. And then lastly, the compliance framework. So I'm about to give you a small tour of this as something we've been developing in collaboration with Chantel from purchasing, who has been absolutely wonderful to work with, and Andrea as well has pitched in with her insights from the sheriff's office, and the county clerk, Danny Lambert, has been great. So I'd like to give you all a quick preview of what that's going to look like here, unless there are any other questions before we
Just
move on.
one, if Chantel has been excellent and Danny was great, what was Andrea?
Andrea is wonderful.
Always just curious if you got that back there. Okay.
Okay. All right, so this is really just a high-level preview of what we're putting together here. We want to formalize this more with you, and probably in the October meeting, we'll have prepared a more thorough, detailed document describing this process, describing the framework, the workflow, roles and responsibilities, documentation and artifacts, all of these things in great detail as an artifact in and of itself that we can point to and say, look, here's the process. This is what we followed for each of these expenditures, etc. So here, quickly, I mean, this will look vaguely familiar to you all, I think. So in the top left, we've got the project authorization step. This is kind of a sub process in and of itself, which is what we're doing here today in evaluating proposals. Making recommendations to BOCC so that they can authorize, et cetera. So once they authorize, that's where this kind of, that's the trigger for this workflow essentially. And so it'll move through kind of your typical procurement process where we're involved. Our team is in purple here, so the ARPA Program Management Office. And so we'll be involved on the front end and kind of that preparation step especially, and helping make sure that we have all the documentation and material that we need to get through compliance on the front end, and then just helping through the rest of the procurement process as needed. They'll receive the order. We'll have receiving officers doing inspections, all those usual things. And then we'll be involved again on the back end where we're doing reporting to Treasury, and we'll want to make sure that we have all the I's dots and T's crossed. Just a quick breakdown. I won't drain the slide or anything, but just a quick breakdown and a look at the different roles involved in this. And you can see where we'll have our PMO here. We'll have our requisition officers, receiving officers within the departments, and then project managers within the departments who will work very closely with all along the way to make sure everything is in order as they go.
So real quick, before you get past that, I know we've had some issues in the past with our cares when it related to requisitioning and then receiving, and the efficiencies and confusion that kind of went along with the fact that we had departments that were ordering goods and they have their own requisitioning officer, and then we have a requisitioning officer for BOCC related specifically to the CARES fund in the past and now ARPA. So my understanding of this is that the requisitioning officer in the department would start that requisitioning process, and then it would be approved. It said purchasing department, but it would actually be reviewed and approved by the requisitioning officer assigned to that ARPA account. Is that correct?
Yeah, the idea is we'll have
who is not in the purchasing department. That was, I just wanted to make sure that was what the process you guys were looking at going forward.
Right. So the idea is that we'd have a kind of a central requisition officer, and the receiving officers would be at the department level, since they're the ones who understand the project better and would be able to sign off, especially on anything technical or construction wise.
Okay, I thought it showed requisitioning officer within the department.
Yes, Cody, to answer your question, with current Munis processes, what's being discussed, Munis is able for the department to send in a requisition and it goes to your appointed requisition officer. Currently, that is Jessica Brody for ARPA funds. She would review those requisitions, whereas the department would be responsible for attaching the appropriate documentation, putting in the correct project codes for this associated, the approval dates, because the departments are tracking all of these. It would go to Jessica. She would review it with Accenture in my office. It would come to purchasing for final review and conversion to purchase order. So I think we're saying the same thing,
Okay.
but there's just multiple steps in between where purchasing office does still have a role, requisitioners still have a role, and so do the departments.
Okay.
In some
Departments, it seems like
capacity.
has a little bit of a greater role in this
At this
scenario than
level.
they did in the CARES scenario.
I actually believe this was utilized during CARES, where departments and Kelly Thomas worked very closely together.
Okay.
The difference, they're tag teaming. I meant, the difference in this is that the requisition being built at the department level within the system
Right,
would then
and
be
not-
captured within the system
Right.
versus before with CARES, it was sort of a, phone call meetings, emails with Kelly to build, and she built it. This way the departments build the requisition in the system, but the approval of it still goes to Kelly Thomas, add the project number, et cetera. Make sure with purchasing that all the documents are attached before it's approved, that sort of thing. That's the difference.
Like we learned from our previous.
Yeah, exactly. And then on the receiving side, instead of having to have the receiving officer assigned to the CARES that we had before, which was in Chantel's office, having to go out and inspect goods and make sure that those goods met the department's order, it'll actually be the receiving officer for that department that is going to be receiving now. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
That's how this is outlined right here.
Okay. Once again, we learned from before.
Yeah,
I appreciate, I know that it sounds monotonous and everything, but I know there was a lot of confusion related to this with CARES and then the beginning of ARPA. And I appreciate you guys all getting together to try to figure out a good solution moving forward.
Absolutely.
As it relates to project management for construction projects, I understand that the project management would be delegated to those in the department.
That's my understanding of the workflow.
So construction projects would be overseen by either engineering or facility management.
It depends on the project.
Capital project, is that what you're asking?
Yes.
A capital project, I would do.
Perhaps a third-party inspector.
Well, but Keith, you're talking about the boots on the ground looking at, did you install the right outlet in the right spot? I think what this is talking about on the workflow is the documentation to make sure that all of the
I understand that
processes are
part of it,
met.
but when I see the workflow, it talks about project management falling to those within the department. And so in my circumstances, construction projects, you would be relying, under this scenario, you would be relying on us or engineering to oversee those projects. Is that correct?
Well, it kind of depends on the way it's arranged, right? So as the
Correct.
contracts and everything are set up, we could do it at risk, or we could do several different ways. What I
Each
don't want to
project
have
has to be
happen in
identified.
this building, Keith, is exactly what happened yesterday, where we have an individual without representation from your crew, John Dennis, and we knock out power to an entire building because we moved one wire.
Well,
And I think that's your concern as well.
but project management overall, we at the end of the day want to make certain that the projects that we engage in are overseen and we don't have any resulting issues after the project is done, the contractors are paid, and so on.
Similar
So
to the
if you're-
cassettes and not having valves
Yeah.
and things like that.
That's exactly right.
Yes, when it comes to a capital construction project, we need as many eyes on it as possible, especially those within your office and within Stacy's office.
But you're not limiting
Period.
that inspection to engineering and facilities entirely.
No,
You are or you're not?
no,
Okay.
no, Keith, this is, a lot of this is just the
This is paper
process to
shuffling.
get it done on the front end.
I understand.
You're talking about the day-to-day boots on the ground and making sure, and that's a separate thing.
This is shuffling paper, and then you're talking about the actual.
So to answer Keith's question out loud in the microphone, every project, and I met with Danny and Stephen and Michael Taylor about this. Every project, you have to identify your oversight, and it will be unique to every single project. And so whether it may be someone employed within the department, or it may be a coordination of individuals, all of that will be outlined and documented at the forefront of every project. Okay.
Okay, slide number 4.
All right, lastly, we just have just a quick rundown of kind of the compliance checklist that we're looking at, the various documentation involved, whether it's an internal control here within the county, a statutory thing that comes from the state, or obviously the federal treasury guidance and the reporting involved with that. Those next steps, we're here in the first block today, presenting this to you as just our high level approach. If no objections, I guess if this will proceed to the budget board Thursday, yep, where they'll authorize the implementation of this design within the Munis system and creating the different buckets of sub-accounts. I hope I'm using that term correctly. Next, we'll go to VOCC, where we'll have to have departments name the receiving officers that they want to have appointed by the VOCC and make sure that everything is in order there and that they're assigned or associated to those new accounts. And then, like I said, in October, we'd like to come back here with the more detailed policy and essentially formalize this framework as our strategy going forward. That's it. Any questions or concerns? And does that sound right? Like the right set of next steps?
It looks good.
Okay.
I will, back to the community engagement real quick. We sent you guys information on Metro Tech as well for District 1. That wasn't in the email that I got back that listed the community center and the Reed Center. Want to make sure that you guys are getting in contact with Metro Tech, because I think in District 1 we're looking at doing 2, so at least 2.
I got an email back from one of the departments that just had some other additional contacts that I reached out to, which is how we got through the Sheraton stuff. I do know one of them is a significant cost of getting. We are building out a community engagement framework as well. Not ready to share. We'd like to build in the community engagement survey that's going to go along with those things and the specific activities that we will have at those events. But the framework itself is built just fitting little details built into it before we wanted to show it to you guys. But yeah, want to make sure that we can use tech in all of these facilities, that there's easy access for parking, that it's accessible
Right.
as well. So definitely taking that into consideration.
Alrighty. All right, with that, we'll get on with it. Thank you.
Steven stole my icebreaker when he noticed that y'all switched. So as usual, we're just going to run through kind of top to bottom on our proposals. As you can see on our overall, we have 9 that are in triage. That's going to be all of our premium pay and salary and benefits. So we won't really get into that during this meeting, but something to be aware of. We have 25 total proposals for P&G consideration. We don't have any that are in the recommended bucket right now, because when you guys in this meeting, they go into recommended and then they go to BOCC. And since BOCC occurred, they've all been authorized, which leads us to the 25. We have 2 in escalation, and as Stephen noted, these are the ones that there has been an increase on the cost of the project. And then we have 16 that we have archived or closed.
Let's start with the projects that have been approved and there's concerns about the total amount.
Yes. So the first one is the Juvenile Bureau's Elevator Capital Plan. So at the very top right, you'll see the original number that was submitted, and then you'll see the current number. So it's about a $64,000 increase. This is based off of the quote they received back. So this is not something that the office came up with. This was what they were quoted when they went to the vendor. And this is the number that they gave them. We do have that quote physically. And so we wanted to bring it to attention as well because the quote is only good for 30 days.
Thinking out loud, everybody needs to help me out here. If we recommend the increase today, that goes to BOCC Monday. And if they recommend or go with the increase, do we have timeline? Is the timeline there to get them a PO in time to cover their 30-day quote?
Yeah, it would, well, you got a budget board issue of moving the money because we got budget board this Thursday, which will be before BOCC would take this up next Monday. So I think in order to get this done prior to the expiration of a 30-day invoice quote or a vendor quote, there would need to be a special budget board meeting, I would think, after next Monday.
All right, let's step back a half a step. The 475, 311, can anyone tell me, is that dropped down into the sub account? Or theoretically, when the sub account's created Thursday, would that automatically drop down into it?
That is the goal at budget board on Thursday, that everything approved to date and the amounts BOCC approved, there would be an agenda item on Thursday for those amounts to go into a place where we can encumber those funds. Whether that amount needs to change to 538, that hasn't been to BOCC yet.
So that
That's what's being
475
discussed.
So assuming that passage happens on Thursday, that 475, 311 falls down, they can start cutting. And so when we roll in and give them the increase of 63,000, they're not going to need that with them. You're not going to need that immediately, right?
Well, you
They'll
have
need
to
to
encumber
encumber the
it
full amount.
completely. Yeah.
Does their current budget allow for them to cover that difference until that money can drop down?
You float $63,000, Hannah?
See, this gets into an issue that I've talked to Chantel with in the past. I understand the workflow that you guys presented today and the benefits associated thereof. However, if we had just a generic ARPA county capital account that had, pick a number, $2 million in it, well, if that money was in there, BOCC meets on Monday. If BOCC meets and determines that they want to put the additional $63,000 in there, you already have the money in that capital account and you could encumber it immediately and not have to wait for another budget board meeting. So,
But you're speaking to putting a lump sum in there, not
Mhm.
identified exact amounts, right?
exactly, you put a lump sum in there and then you can still identify specific things as you go along, but you've got something there that will allow us to not
just
be in this
haven't
type
done
of
it yet.
situation.
It's similar to whether we did care or something.
Exactly.
Right. You just haven't done those actions
Right.
like that so far. What you've done so far, the one budget board meeting you went to, you put specific amounts into specific buckets.
Right.
So just
And that's how
identifying
this
the change
work,
of process.
the workflow looks like it's going to work well with creating those specific buckets for specific projects, not necessarily a big just bucket, but I mean, there's trade-offs whichever way we go. But if we had a lump sum in a capital account, then when things like this occur, we wouldn't have to wait for budget board. BOCC action would be all that would be necessary.
Well, I thought my project was going to be $475,311. Can anyone help me with that $2 million bucket? How that affects reporting?
We would just have to drill it down, like into the specifics. And this was something we had thought about too, as so we were able to get these, like for the two projects that we're presenting, we have this information in advance of this meeting, so we're able to present it to you guys. And then budget board is on Thursday, and we knew there was a BOCC next week. But if I got this quote tomorrow, we don't see you guys necessarily even in that 30-day window, and that becomes its own kind of caveat of something that we might would want to walk through on whether we would want to do like a special P&G meeting to walk through those things and then have a BOCC immediately after, things like that, something to think about as well. We were prepared with these, but I worry that may not always be the case based on when we get them from vendors.
Yeah, but I would think that if it was a situation like this, we wouldn't necessarily have to have a special meeting because this is just a price change in an invoice. We could get with Juvenile, find out, why. Well, the old price expired.
Mm-hmm.
You could send an email that says nothing about changing this invoice changes the
integrity,
eligibility of this, and then BOCC could just move forward on Monday.
As long as that's allowed, yeah, that's fine.
And that would be the next question. Is it allowed to recreate a bucket with $5 million in it for cost overruns, inflationary,
So
contracts expiring, whatever?
To Chantel's point, like we want you have to put it all together. So like if we're gonna pull $540,000, it all needs to come from that $5 million bucket. We don't want to have $475 in one and then the $64,000 in the other. Like you would want it all together.
What's the reasoning behind that?
Reporting.
Is it statutory or is it
Part of that's going to be on
is it
reporting. Yeah.
It's not that it's illegal. It's just more time consuming.
And being able to use Munis as it's set up. So how you set up your accounts will affect how certain roles, requisitioning, receiving, how that works in the system. So we want to make sure how the accounts are set up. It flows down through who can do what inside Munis. That's just kind of what we've been trying to work through so far.
Which is why if we want to use the workflow that was discussed earlier, it almost takes off the table the putting a lump sum in there. And we may have these instances occasionally, so it may be worthwhile. The benefits of doing the other workflow may outweigh a situation like this. But I would like it if there was a way to do both.
Well, it was just presented as an idea, or maybe idea is the wrong word. Juvenile has several projects being approved for on Thursday for budget board. Several. Some are immediate and some are not. Some will have to go to bid or through a process that will not be ready for encumbrance. If this goes through the appropriate approval process, there will be available funds in their juvenile bucket, if you will, with those terms, that they could encumber the 538, 898 after Monday.
Hey, how about this? What would preclude us from having an agenda item on budget board to approve the additional amount for this project contingent upon BOCC approving that project on Monday?
Let me hear from the retiree first.
I don't have any wonderful wisdom except that I do want to say as simple as you can make it is going to be the way you should go, in my opinion, because a whole bunch of the projects that you've approved are capital and they're all like 30-day quotes. And so it's not just this time, it's going to happen over and over and over. So you really got to have something simple, and one budget board meeting a month, that's the timing of that is unlikely that it's going to work, and they don't want to keep having meetings.
Right.
So also there's the issue of change orders that could come up, which is the same thing as a quote expiring. It's a price change. So that has to be taken into consideration.
I mean, as we're sitting there talking about railroad strikes and stuff like that, it's possible that our prices on a bunch of this stuff just skyrocket. And then the question is, how long do we want to sit and wait for some of this stuff as well? Or do we want to pay premiums? What, you got Danny waiting in the wings?
Well, yeah, he heard my previous comment. Go ahead, Danny.
All right, just so you know, what we're working on right now for budget board on Thursday, we're working on the setup. So right now we've got 3 departments set up in ARPA. The 2 are county projects and county reimbursements. The plan is, under county projects, each department, juvenile is gonna have a sub-department set up under there so they can do their own receiving, sheriff, whatever project for that department, emergency management, we're setting those up. So for example, this project here will have its own project number, 009, and it'll be within the juvenile sub-department set up under county projects. So on the budget line item for this particular project, we'll have funds checking that goes against the total, whichever total that is, 538,000 will be assigned to that particular project. So any overage is going to check against that total. Like if they try to encumber something over that amount, it would stop them due to funds checking, the way we're setting it up.
Which is the situation we're in right now. The 475 was the amount that we had before. Now it's the 538.
Right.
Is there a way that we can utilize the workflow that you've come up with, which is going to be a good way, I think, to track projects and everything, but also create an amount somewhere that when we do have these occur and BOCC is meeting, for instance, the situation we're in right now, budget board's meeting this Thursday, BOCC can't meet before budget board because we're Tuesday at 10:45. Earliest we could schedule a BOCC special meeting would be Thursday at 10:45 after budget board's already meeting, right? So BOCC will take these items up on Monday, and budget board doesn't meet again until, a month later. So is there a way that we can have money in there so BOCC can take action and not have to wait for budget board to move it down into that item? And it may not be possible. This situation here is that this quote expires in 30 days, which will be before budget board meets again.
On the construction side, Cody, we do that pretty often, where we just approve it and push it forward. Like, so budget board would make the motion that we approve this, assuming that the OCC recommends this project go forward.
Well, and that's what I was saying. I think maybe the appropriate way to do it in this instance, because of the way everything works, is to put an agenda item on budget board to put the additional amount needed into juvenile contingent upon BOCC approving that project next Monday.
Yeah, that's the problem you're going to run into if you're budgeting by these projects individually. I think budget board's role in this is, yes, we're going to approve the new sub-departments. Budget board will, approve those on Thursday. And then moving money from the main cost center that where the money's sitting right now, the 140 million, down to the county projects, whatever the total of all these projects are. Budget board's going to approve moving that money down into that cost center, and then we'll divvy it up amongst all these individual projects based on that. But yeah, when you run into overage, it's going to be an issue.
All right. So as mentioned earlier, sub-account is there. Juvenile Bureau has several items in that sub-account. I'm not going to want to do this all the time, because the larger the project, the bigger the number is of separation. But in this particular instance, there'll be enough money in that sub-account to cover the 63,587 with those other dollars are down in there. In that scenario, is there a way to?
Like pulling it from the other project?
Yeah.
I don't know that we would necessarily want to do that because BOCC hasn't approved pulling it from.
Well, and what's the wording we use? Encumbering. We say something.
Subject to encumbrance?
Yeah.
I mean, you might want to consider not just tying the budget down to the exact amount of that project. Allow for some overage. So if your project's 475,000, maybe just transfer 600,000 into that project.
That's what I just came
Yeah.
to Stephen and was like,
Well,
should we just do 20%?
all that's fun and games, but then the pile disappears quicker. And in, for instance, like a project that is yet to be determined on this went from 4.8 to 8.4. And then based on these numbers, I could see where that project's easily a 10.6. And that's dead in the water as far as I'm concerned, because we've just doubled the price of that particular project.
I think what we could do is require, although I've told Stacy and Keith numerous times, we need to start telling people Oklahoma County does not do change orders. And that's what I get every time. But add 10%, which is the change order amount, just automatically include 10% change order in all of the approvals. That way we at least have that amount in there.
That works when you're ahead of the game. However, market pricing and changes in the economy are going to affect these numbers. So something anticipatory for the inflationary pressures and the availability and timeline need to be taken into consideration.
Okay, so I think Accenture, Chantel, you guys all understand the situation that we're wanting to try to prevent in the future, right? So I think what we could do is just look at this and have an agenda item on budget board to, subject to approval by BOCC, move this additional money in there, and then it can be taken care of by Monday at the Monday BOCC meeting. And in the interim, while we're not meeting with you guys for a little while, you can, and Danny may have an epiphany of another way that maybe we can do it. Maybe we can't. Maybe we're stuck with this and we're having to, take a $475,000 project and improve it at $600,000 to keep this stuff from happening. Or maybe there's something that we haven't thought about, but we're probably not going to think about it on the fly here in this meeting. So I think we can take care of this one since we got budget board this Thursday, and then you guys try to figure out if there's another way that we can approach this to head stuff like this off. And if there's not, there's not.
Yeah,
But
and it shouldn't be an issue outside of the capital projects, which is a big caveat because capital projects are the big projects. But on like our reimbursements on COVID testing and benefits and retirements and things like that, like there shouldn't be an increase in the number, right? It should only be with the capital improvements that we're going to see this because the prices of materials are changing and things like that. So the other ones ideally should be fine.
okay. I make a motion that we recommend BOCC approve the additional amount of $63,587 into this project.
Second.
Motion is second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Danny, do you need somebody from here, or can you guys facilitate that budget board agenda item contingent upon BOCC approving on Monday? Okay. Yep.
This. Okay, I guess y'all haven't made a motion yet.
Yeah, we made a
Okay,
motion
it's
second.
done?
We voted.
Okay. All right, so the other one we have for this week is the Annex front entrance. So the original amount was the $1 million, and there's a $125,000 increase on that. That increase is specific to needing to prep the work to move the books that are associated with that office. So they would need to demo and remodel what I believe is the purchasing office in order to bring in the books and their shelving, and in order to meet ADA compliance and then be aware of the sprinkler systems. There's just a little bit of cost associated with that. So the number we're giving is $125,000.
Would the expense of moving purchasing up to the third floor, since they're having to vacate that so we can do that, would that be an allowable expense into this project?
Built into, I think yes. Is it?
She's having
She
to
needs a
move.
new office.
She's having to move because we're gonna utilize her space.
It would need to be its own project.
Okay.
Like the cost of the moving the books into the space can be covered because it's associated with, you can't do the front annex entrance without moving the books. So you can kind of tie those together.
Well, but that's what I was saying, but we can't do that without moving her because the books are going where she is. But that's fine. We could
it
look
just
at that
starts
separate.
getting too,
Okay.
yeah, it's
And
too far removed.
as I asked in the previous project, are there monies from that department that could help supplement that? I don't know what you just said.
He said
but
it's more than his entire budget.
I don't worry about his budget. There is a clerk's budget that has monies to work with those preservation of those documents.
I thought they had previously agreed. Did Danny stand up there and say that they would use funds to move the book?
Is this, I know there was a situation that we were told in BET that they were told by the DA's office they weren't legally able to spend the money for that. Was that just moving
That was to
across
buy
the
a
hall?
building.
The
No, it
money
was also to,
that you're looking at here is to prepare the space across the hall. The clerk's money
Right.
cannot be
cannot be
used
used
for
for
that.
that.
The clerk will spend their own money to actually move the books and buy the shelving.
But this is prepping the
That's what she
space.
just
This
described.
is prepping the space.
So it's the sentence that throws me off. Okay. The prep, as I say, the prep work needed for moving the books.
Yes.
Okay. That was, okay.
Right.
It has
And-
nothing to do with moving the books. It has everything to do with demolition of a room.
Correct.
Okay.
And my understanding is the question was asked of the DA's office whether the prep work could also be paid for from the clerk's records preservation fund, and they were told no, that statutorily they cannot spend that fund on that purpose.
That's correct. That's what they were told. The reason for this 125,000 is if not for the project, you wouldn't even be having to do this. So that's the same thing with Chantel's space. If not for this project, she wouldn't have to move. So you could actually probably put another 125 if you wanted to.
Well, the consultant is saying that we probably need that as a separate project because it's going to be in a different space or whatever. So we can, I hope you get with them on that and work with them to see if that is an approvable project on its own.
Right. And the reason we didn't is because it was already previously funded.
Right.
But then until it wasn't.
Right?
What does that mean?
I think there's the issue with ARPA paying for her move. It's in order for us to be able to socially distance inside the new security, we must move books. In order to move books, we must move Chantel. In order to move Chantel, we must have a space remodeled and ready for her to move to. It is 1, 2, 3, 4 dominoes, one project in order for it to happen. I think separating the project is probably a bad idea because it's all one project in my mind. Because in order for one thing to happen, for the end goal to be reached, it takes Chantel moving, period.
And if
There's no way, if, and, or but around it, other than completely removing those books and moving them somewhere else, which is the way I understand it statutorily we can't do. None of it happens in this project without Chantel.
and the qualification to be eligible for ARPA is because of the social distancing on the first floor. So if you pull this out and it's just sitting on its own, then it may not qualify. Whereas the trigger for why we need to do it is the requirement, which is the other project.
So I agree with what you just said, Miles. I think what we might want to do here is just
rework.
Provide,
factors
well,
and-
but provide the alternatives too. So if this is the best option, in some cases for capital projects, Treasury is asking for what are the alternatives and how much do those cost, and why is it best to go with this one that we're using? So we looked at that with the EOC, if you'll recall. We looked at 3 or 4 options.
I love that you asked that about this specific project, because we had beaten this one to death and looked at about 20 different ways of making this one happen.
That's great. Yeah.
This one's the least expensive. It's the quickest. It's the easiest for us to do. Stacy back there has more research than you can possibly imagine on this. We've looked at moving entrances to another building and swapping floors, and we've looked at knocking walls, pushing walls out to the north. We've looked at pushing them to the south. We've looked at moving our entrance to the west. I mean, we've done copious amounts of debate over how to
Due
do this best and
diligence.
cheap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah, without a doubt, this will be in my mind. I think it's very, very easy to take Chantel's entire project and do, but that's me. So, in that regard, I would think we'd want to take Chantel's aspect of the project, put it into this number along with the 125, and clarify that the 125 is a demolition cost for that area to be prepared and not actually moving books.
And did Stacy have a number
$25,000.
on that addition?
For Chantel's space, I think it's like $300,000. And isn't that right, Stacy? Aren't we like at 300?
No, I thought we were using 100 or 125,000 out of the
What was
other
approved
account.
was 118 and some change out of your guys' special
Yeah.
monies.
Yeah.
But you had to reroute that to the courthouse.
Yeah.
So hers being 118, which is an approximate, because we haven't bid it yet, I'd put another 125 in there. So you'd be at 1,250.
I would love to do that, but without, I don't know, can we?
All right, is there items that we need to add to this?
Yeah, Stacy, if you could get with Accenture and Danny and Stephen and put that plan together for this and just wrap it all up together. Chantel's office, Chantel's current office demolition, and then the build out of the new area and the moving of the books. So every bit of that, it all hinges on Chantel, and she's been more than gracious to move again. So if we could put all that together and then resubmit it, can you do that? Or have Aaron do it, whomever. Thank you. Okay, project number 3. Does everybody get that? Everybody fine with that?
Yeah.
Okay, so they'll present that to us at the next P&G. And then with that note, I'm going to move that we recess to 11:15.
How many more of these do we have?
Second.
These are the only two that have amendments on them.
I have a motion second to recess to 11:15. All those in favor say aye.
Which means it.
So
11.
there's 11 new projects and 25 that P&G hasn't made a